What this is, it's like the immunoassay that where again we have our sample over here, we have this PSA, we got the antibody over here. We put them in some kind of water, and if we see something in some stain right over here, it means they're interacting with each other. That means that our antigen is interacting with a P30. That means this one had the sample at P30. It was a seminal stain. There are others that produce P30, but nothing as much as seminal fluid. So this is pretty much a good test for seminal fluid. So we actually do two of them, the acid phosphatase test with the MUP or the other test. And if this is positive within 30 seconds, okay, we're pretty sure that it must have been a seminal stain. Then we do this thing, this other stain, with the PSA checking for P30. If that shows this little stain in between that it was P30, then we can pretty much guarantee that this is a seminal stain, and we can understand that certain things went on. So the obvious crime involving that fluid is this. So whenever we have a suspected or crime scene involving this crime, we check for blood, hair, and fibers. Generally speaking, what we're looking for is DNA, because this was left behind. Now that we use DNA readily, it's as easy as it became, and it's as effective as it is. A lot of this is focusing on we want the attacker's DNA. If we can find it, we want to get it. So we want to try to collect blood, hair, fibers, whatever we can to as evidence. Hopefully things that will have DNA. I mean, fibers won't necessarily have it, but blood and hair may very well have it. So we ask the victim to disrobe without the shoes over a paper sheet or several paper sheets, one at a time, and we transport this to the laboratory, because as they remove the clothing, some hairs might, if we don't put it on a paper sheet, then they put it, let's say, on a whatever it is, on a table. Some hairs might fall off on the table and we won't see them again. We tell them to do it over a paper sheet, then we'll hopefully catch all the hairs, and maybe I'll be able to identify the attacker by these foreign hairs. Every article of clothing is packaged separately, and if we suspect seminal stains, then be careful when it comes to folding the clothing. Try not to fold it, because you fold it, if the sperm cells are dry, they'll disintegrate. We want to try as well as we can to get all the evidence possible. So preferably don't fold it so it won't flake off, or the sperm cells won't get disintegrated by the friction. So try to avoid that. So try to avoid folding the clothing. Be gentle with it. And the victim generally undergoes an examination what's called a rape kit. This is it's a kit. It's like a collection of things that are used in order to try to collect evidence from the person that was attacked. First, as part of this rape kit, whatever it is, evidence collection, we do a gentle combing of that area, because we assume the contact was there and the attacker would have left hair behind. Now we have to do it gently. We have to do it without getting deep into it, because the attacker's hairs would just be on the surface and they would not be attached. If we do a rough combing, then we might pull out the victim's hair, and we're not going to catch. We're not going to know that this is the victim's. We're not going to be able to find or to separate the attacker's hair, which is only on the surface and is not attached. So we do a gentle combing and try to remove any of the attacker's possible hairs that ended up there. We also get that hair of the victim. We want to make sure that if we find a different hair somewhere else, we want to know whose hair it is. If it's the hair of the victim, we want to know how to identify the hair of the victim. So if we find some other hair, we test it, we compare it to the hair of the victim. If it's the hair of the victim, we know, well, that's not evidence. If it's the hair of somebody else, then that other person can become a suspect. So we must cut off hair of the victim, at least 25 of them, and very close to the skin level. These are these are standard samples. We do this. We always want to compare evidence to what's there. We take one dry swab and a wet swab over that area. Again, we're trying to collect any DNA that might have been transferred by the attacker to the victim. So presumably there was contact there. We're going to try to collect any DNA from there. We get some swabs, vaginal swabs. inside. We take 2 of them. They've got to be air dried, and they're packaged together. These are just the swabs. That we air dry them. If they're not, they're all wet. They're gonna, who knows what they're gonna collect from whenever they bang around their container. So we want them dry, and we package them together for the lab. Then we take 2 more of them. These are put on slides, and the slides are allowed to air dry, and the slides go to the forensic laboratory for more analysis. Hopefully, we'll catch an attacker's DNA in there, and we'll be able to identify them. We also take 2 swabs of the cervix area that's deep inside. Again, these are to be air dried and packaged. If the victim tells us, or if we know for some other way, that the rectal area is relevant, then we do 2 rectal swabs. One of them is wiped under a slide. One of them is just air dried and packaged as it is. This is comparing. I mean, this is not as thorough as. Again, it's not as common, so it's not as thorough as the vaginal swabs, where we have 2 of them, 2 of each, 2 of the air dried swabs, and 2 of them on slides. The rectal area only has one regular swab and 1 on a slide. Sometimes the oral area is relevant, so we use 2 swabs here, the inside of the cheeks and the gum line also. Both of these are put on a slide and allowed to air dry, and each one is packaged separately. Again, we're hoping to get the DNA of the attacker. If we know other body parts have been touched, we try to get samples from there. DNA could have ended up there. Use cotton swabs there. If there's any saliva or maybe other kind of DNA evidence elsewhere, we're going to try to pick it up there too. If we find foreign head hairs somewhere, we want to make sure they're not of the victim, so we cut the hairs of the victim for comparison. Cut them at skin level, front, back, top, and sides, just in case. We need at least 25 hairs. We take a blood sample because we want to know if drugs were involved. Sometimes there's a question of whether the person was impaired, or again, we want to know if someone was doing something illegal by taking drugs, or maybe they were selling drugs there. A lot of possibilities, but when there's crime, very often there's drugs. We want to know about that, and that's why we want to take the blood sample. We also take a buccal swab. That's where we swab the inside of the cheeks of the victim, and this picks up cells and it picks up DNA. So we want that. We want the victim's DNA because if we find someone's DNA, we want to know if it's the attackers or the victim. So now we have a sample of the victims, we'll know to compare it, and we'll know whether it's the victims or the attackers. We also take a urine sample. This is again to test for some kind of drug involvement in this crime. Finally, we take fingernail scrapings because very often the victim might have scratched the attacker for whatever reason. I mean, as defense or I don't know. So we take the samples from under the fingernail. We scrape the fingernails, we wipe them, and we put these in a paper and package them and send them off to the lab. Again, we're checking for foreign DNA, and each hand gets a separate paper. Now, we have to remember that the victim might have shaken hands with her best friend. So if there may be fingernail scrapings in that case if it was accidentally scratched. So that might not prove much, but again, it's certainly a good piece of evidence, certainly worthwhile to know about and to at least point us in the right direction. Also, if we have a suspect, we try to take the suspect's undergarments because the suspect, if the person really was guilty, they probably pulled or touched, contacted the victim's DNA and left